Beekeeping is a centuries-old tradition that has numerous benefits. From the honey we enjoy to the crop pollination we may not always be aware of, honeybees are vital to our nation's agriculture industry, food supply, and healthcare. It's beekeeping, next on Show Me Ag. Welcome to Show Me Ag. I'm your host, Kyle Vickers. Thanks for joining us. Beekeeping is a hobby for many, but a big and important business for all of us. Many of the foods we take for granted on our tables would not be possible without help from bees, and beekeepers work hard to supplement nature's supply of these busy workers. Our guest tonight is Tom O'Neill. He currently serves as a librarian for the Midwestern Beekeepers Association, as well as maintaining his own bee and honey business near Warrensburg. Thanks for joining us, Tom. We appreciate it. I've talked to a few people in preparation for this story, and beekeeping seems to be an obsession for many.
It's like a hobby that gets out of control pretty quickly.
How did you get into it?
Well, I had bees when I was a kid for a few years, and then we moved on. And after I got out of the military, we retired and had 40 acres, and we thought, I need to do something. So that was one of my first things I got into.
And how's that grown for you?
Well, it's been a lot of fun. When we sold the farm, the person who bought it wanted the bees, so I just kept one hive, brought it with me up here to Warrensburg, and just started from that one. Now I have 10 hives.
I know you live on a fairly small acreage. This is something you can really do as a backyard hobby, isn't it?
Right. It's my son lives in a suburb, and he has 4 hives right there. So.
And how much work is it for 10 hives? Is that a full-time job?
In the spring, it gets a little bit busy, and then when you harvest the honey, it's a busy time. But other than that, it's just a good thing to do. Watch the bees.
Do you obviously with 10 hives, you have more honey than you and your wife can consume. What happens to that honey?
Well, I sell the surplus at a couple of produce stands, and of course, it always makes great Christmas gifts, and the UPS person and the mail carrier and those things.
It's a nice gift for them, for sure. Well, it turns out that beekeeping is one of the fastest growing industries in Missouri agriculture. And before we continue our conversation, we thought we'd visit with one of Tom's fellow beekeepers from the Midwestern Beekeepers Association. Kathy Misko of Centerview, Missouri, has been keeping bees for over 20 years, providing honey for friends and family while helping her neighbors pollinate their fields.
The importance of beekeeping is, I would say, number one is for pollination. A third of all the foods we eat is because of the pollination of the honeybee. Even the beef, the hamburger that you might have for lunch, that beef is there because bees had pollinated the forage that the cows would feast upon. So they pollinate the grasses also. So basically every third bite just go 1, 2, 3 bee, and you really will gain an appreciation for the honeybee for that. Many beekeepers will rent out their hives. There's a number of orchards, farms that pay for pollination of their crops from the honeybee, and they will draw out contracts. There are many beekeepers that is their livelihood, providing pollination where they don't have honeybees because of the pesticides and herbicides that they've basically voided. They voided the honeybee in their local areas. Some of these beekeepers will truck thousands of colonies clear across the country just for that to provide that pollination. The declining numbers, many people are interested in the honeybee now, and because of what they call colony collapse disorder, There's been a lot of attention on PBS, the public stations, and the radios to talk about this, and also to alert people of the importance of the honeybee. So we have a lot of people very interested. A lot of the new beekeepers are beekeepers because they want to do something, they want to help. They've looked at a number of things. There's a number of things. They said we don't have evidence that it's because of cell phones or the electrical wires. There's things that they'll say we do not think that's what it is. But the bees have a very, very big problem right now in that they have a mite called the varroa mite, and it attaches itself to the bees on either as they're an adult, or it will attach, the female will go inside a cell before it's capped and attach herself to the pupa and lay her eggs, and then as these pupas mature and emerge, they're full of mites, and then they pass them on. And these mites can cause deformed wings on them. And so the bees can't fly. So they can't, if they can't fly, they can't work. If they can't work, they can't bring any food home, and the bees will die of starvation that way. But they're also looking at this varroa mite. Not only does it suck out the juices from the bee, but it also will inject viruses, so it's a vector. And what they do know, something is weakening the bees, and this weakening of the bees is making them more susceptible to viruses and for them to be ill. Something that they're also doing research on, it's the pesticides. We have pesticides in the United States that is banned in Canada, banned in Europe, but we use these pesticides. And something about these chemicals, when we put them on our food, when it touches our soil, or even the grasses and it leaches into the soil or the water, it stays in that soil for many years. I believe they still are seeing traces of DDT, and it's been banned for years. So these chemicals, we have to really, really look at them. What I could say is we still do not know the one cause. We think it's a combination of causes, but we do need to re-look at how we're living, how we're doing things, and see if we can make some adjustments. There's some things that the farmers can do. One would be maybe tilling things under instead of automatically spraying and killing. Another thing, when they're spraying, to try to spray at the end of the day, the latter part of the day, because the bees go home, and so you won't have as many bees out. Not spraying during full bloom when the bees are out there. Cool, cloudy days are better. There's not as many bees flying. So there's some things that the farmer can do in that sense. Hobby farmers and those of us with backyard gardens, stay away from 7 dust. It stays a long time. The bees take it back to their hive, and it's very toxic to the honeybees. Beekeeping is a very rewarding hobby and profession. We're out working with nature. We are working with bugs, but we're working with the nature. Listen to the birds. I mean, I hear this all the time when I'm out there working the bees.
Another one.
But there's an added benefit of just your personal happiness and joy to be working with nature and to know that you are helping other people. I'm helping all of my local farmers around me. Bees will fly a 4-mile radius, and they pollinate those soybeans, and I'd like them to put beets in and some other things, but to help the bees. But they provide pollination for all my local farmers. So I am actually, or I'm not, the bees are helping them, and it helps their bottom line and helps their bushels of baskets of produce, and so that's a really nice feeling for me. This would be a good one.
To learn more about how you can get involved in beekeeping, you can visit the Midwestern Beekeepers Association at the address below, Midwestern Beekeepers.org. Tom, Kathy's interview really brings up a lot of questions, but let's start with this one. She's out there bare-armed with just the mask. A lot of people are scared of bees, afraid of the real aggressive bees that we've heard about. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the individuals too. You know, if you're afraid of them, you're probably going to get stung. Kathy is a very experienced beekeeper, and she used to wear protective gear, and she's weaned herself from doing that. And you move slowly and with confidence, and it's not a big deal. And
we've heard a little bit about Africanized bees, which seem to be more south of our area. But tell us a little bit about how that.
Well, they're very much like our regular honeybees. They're a little more aggressive. If you get around a colony of Italian bees, you might get stung by 1 or 2 bees, but the Africanized bees are a lot more protective of their colony, so if one of them stings you, you're probably going to have 100 more after you, and you try to run from them, and they're going to be right after you.
Make it worse.
Yeah.
She mentioned disease. I know that's been a problem, disappearing hives, and for a while we were very, very concerned about the disappearance of bees, but are you folks bringing back more bee colonies, more bee population?
I think so. Most of the folks that are involved with our Beekeepers Association are hobby beekeepers, and we don't move our colonies around. I've never had an issue with it. I was in Hickory County for about 8 years, and then we've been up here for about 8, and I've never had that issue. And it seems more like the folks that are moving their hives all over the country and around large plots of ground are getting exposure to whatever it is that's causing the problem.
Well, that brings up a good point. Kathy mentioned, but bees are transported all over the country, specifically fruit areas. I know all up and down the West Coast. Occasionally you'll hear about a truckload of bees that overturns. First time I heard that, I thought, what in the world is somebody doing with a truckload of bees? Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Well, you've got professional beekeepers that we call them migratory beekeepers. They line up their contracts on the West Coast or wherever it is they're going to take their bees for pollination, and they'll just follow the crops. They'll have it all lined up. They'll work a certain area as long as it needs to be and move on, and the farmers will pay a rental fee for each colony.
The farmers are really dependent, as I understand it. Most of our grain crops, even though bees will feed on soybeans, it's not essential for pollination, but in many of the crops that we enjoy in a grocery store, it's absolutely essential, isn't it?
Sure. About 80% of our fruits and vegetables require some kind of pollination. And if you depended on just the local pollinators, the feral bee colony, it just wouldn't happen. They can pollinize the bees and bring in hundreds of hives to an orchard, and so all of your bees get, all of your apples get pollinated at once, and they become ripe all at once and can be harvested.
So a lot of the fruit, the peaches and apples and so on that we buy at the grocery store have been pollinated by bees somewhere else as somebody has brought in those larger colonies, larger populations.
Whether it be vegetables or in cranberry bogs, wherever, it's been bees that have been brought in there.
One of the most fascinating things to me is learning a little bit about the social structure in a bee colony, and I don't know if folks noticed it on the video, but that queen was marked with a little yellow spot.
Right.
Tell us a little bit. I mean, this is very, very complicated, but tell us a little bit about how that social structure works.
Well, you have one queen per hive normally, and her primary function is to lay eggs, and she lays between 12 and 1,500 a day. The workers are all female. They do all of the chores in the colony. For the first 3 weeks of life, they're within the colony, cleaning up cells for the queen to lay fresh eggs in, doing everything that's required, feeding the younger larvae and defending the entrance. And then the last 3 weeks of their life, they're out foraging. The other component, then there's the male bees, the drones. Their only function is to mate with any virgin queen. And they live throughout the summer, and in the fall, they're no longer allowed in the hive, so they perish.
Perish due to cold weather.
Right.
And so let me get this straight. The women do all the work.
Right.
And tell us the relationship to the queen. Only one queen per hive, is that right?
Right.
Tell us how that works. How does she get picked?
Well, no, that's a good question from the very beginning. When the bees decide to swarm, if that's their normal way of reproduction from one colony to another, the workers will decide and they'll build a queen cell. The queen will lay an egg in there. As that develops, they'll start preparing to swarm. The last few days, they'll stop feeding the queen so she loses weight and she's able to fly again. On the day that they swarm, the old queen leaves, and about half the workers in the colony go with her. And they'll land maybe within 100 yards of the original colony, send out scout bees looking for a new home, a new cavity in a tree or whatever. And when they find that, then they move into that cavity, and that's the new colony. The old colony that queen will hatch out within a few days, she'll develop within another few days. She'll make a mating flight. Well, when she'll mate with a number of drones, and then return to that colony, and she'll be there until she dies, or she's replaced, or she decides to swarm.
And that queen can last 2 or 3 years, right?
Right.
But the regular female worker bees only have about a 6-week life.
Right. They'll literally fly their wings off in the summertime, in the spring and summer, and over that 3-week period that they're a forager, they make trips back and forth from the honey source to the hive as often as they can until they
wear themselves out.
Yeah, they just fly their wings off.
And what's sort of their preferred food source? I mean, it's obviously blooms from a variety of things.
It starts out early in the spring with the black locust around this area. They love that. It moves on to blackberries, and we just went through the yellow sweet clover. It's pretty much done now. That's one of their very favorite crops. And the white sweet clover is blooming now, and also sumac. And we're just about to wind down. Probably the end of June will be the end of our honey flow.
So any of these blooms, then, what are they? Tell us how that works exactly. I think if we learned about the birds and bees in grade school, most of us have forgotten that part of it. Tell us a little bit why is that important to the plant?
Well, the bees go in there. They're primarily after the nectar. They're also after the pollen themselves, and they'll take that pollen and nectar, go back to the hive, deposit the nectar, and while they're always touching other bees, they're spreading that pollen amongst the other bees. Those bees are coming and going to different plants, different trees, so they're cross-pollinating from one tree to another. It's not necessarily just that one bee that collects that pollen and takes it to the next plant. They'll go back to the hive, share that pollen, and it's spread through a wider area.
How many thousand bees are in a typical hive or colony?
A good solid hive will have about 60,000 bees in it.
And they're all busy going out from plant to plant and spreading that pollen around.
Right. As soon as it gets daylight in the morning and it starts warming up, we usually try to position our hives facing the south and the east, so they get that morning sun and warms them up quicker and get them out there working.
And they're busy really all during daylight hours.
Right.
One thing you mentioned as we were visiting earlier that on a per hive basis, Alaska has the best production because
they have more hours of daylight.
That midnight sun, that bee is busy all day long.
Yeah, doesn't get much of a break.
So you've got thousands of bees out here and depositing this pollen. Tell us a little bit about how honey is actually made up. I mean, that's always a mystery. I love honey, but tell us really what it is.
Well, they bring that the nectar back to the hive. The bee has two stomachs, and one of it is the honey stomach. It's a storage area. They bring it back. They pass that to a house bee, which takes it in turn and puts that into a honey comb. In the process, they're transferring enzymes from one bee to the other. That nectar is primarily a liquid, and the bees start to dehydrate that and remove the moisture from it through ventilation. And once that honey gets down to 18% moisture content, then they cap the honey, and there it is.
It's amazing to me. It all seems so scientific. You mentioned the preciseness of these days like the queen. After so many days, was it 16 days or something? And all these things seem very precise. And obviously from evolution from a long time ago.
Yeah, and we think it's really precise, and I think the bees just take it for granted. We study and read books and watch DVDs, and I don't think those bees ever crack a book. They just know how to do it, and or sometimes you'll try to manage them and do everything by the book, and the bees will still do what they want to do.
They want to do it on their own time schedule.
That's it.
Kathy mentioned some of the challenges out there with pesticides and so on. What are some things that really challenge your beehives?
I think in a lot of cases, besides the pesticides, there's just lack of habitat. The bees will go out a couple of miles, and that encompasses 8,000 acres, but with more and more housing developments being built and less land put into production, the bees sometimes have to go further.
I was reading that in a lot of more or less urban areas, even if people have flowers, but they mow their lawns, they mow it very closely. Yeah. They don't want grass and weeds and so on to stand up and be seen. Weeds are a very important thing for the bees as well, aren't they?
Sure. Once you become a beekeeper, you have a whole new appreciation for dandelions. So.
Does that make good honey?
Oh, it does. The bees work that hard.
And I know a lot of times you'll see in a store it'll say clover honey or something like that. Is there different flavors that you get to with different products that the honey's made up of?
First thing in the spring, you've got your lighter honeys. The locust and blackberry and that type of stuff. Later, as the year progresses, your honey darkens because of the source of the honey, and you get into the sumacs. Later in the fall, you have asters and goldenrod, ragweed, that type of stuff.
People buy honey in the store. Is it always local honey? Where do we get most of our honey?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of it is imported. We have a mixture of American honey and honey that's brought in from overseas. Some of the larger companies are even cutting it with high fructose corn syrup. So some states have passed laws. Florida, I believe, was the first to pass a law that says if something is labeled honey, it has to actually be honey. And it'd be a good thing for the rest of the country to come up with laws like that so that we don't get honey that is not pure.
Pure honey being likely if it's local, but not necessarily if it's manufactured. It comes from a long ways off. A lot of it is going to be Chinese honey, isn't it?
Right.
About a third of the honey, something like that?
One of the things I read here recently, that about a third of the honey consumed in the United States is honey that has been smuggled in from China, gone through different countries and relabeled and brought into this country illegally.
And they're the biggest producer, but we don't know where all that came from,
That's
right?
Yeah.
So I know honey has, and bees, there's bee pollen, there's quite a bit of health benefits and real research to show that honey can be a very beneficial product to an individual.
A lot of people that have allergies will consume local honey, and they'll get that pollen. As a local beekeeper, I saw my honey. It's just the way it came out of the honeycomb. I spin it out, filter out the pieces of wax or any the larger pieces of pollen, so it looks pretty. It's nice and clear, but it's not pasteurized. There's nothing been done to it. Nothing has been added to it. It's just pure honey. And
is it safe to eat? Is it good for you to eat that honey like that?
Yes, it is. And I don't think I've ever seen a bee with arthritis.
Well, that's an interesting. I have a little arthritis in one of my knees, and you recommended something as we were visiting earlier that I'm not sure I'm ready to try, but bee sting therapy.
Yeah, it was kind of a coincidence that you guys were already talking about it, and I'd just been doing it to myself this last week, and I don't know what I had, but there was an issue in my neck that was cracking and popping and a lot of pain. I don't have a bad reaction to bee stings, but I went ahead and started applying the bee stings 2 a day. And after about 5 days, the popping and cracking has gone away, and so has the pain.
Well, if you want to go on the internet, you can find lots of. I've already tried this. Yeah. There's lots of things that bee pollen and honey and so on are claims. But if my wife suffers from allergies, I'm going to try to get her some honey. We're in about the time that this fall when her allergies really kick up. So I really appreciate your time here, Tom, and appreciate your service to all of us for maintaining these beehives. But I'm afraid that's all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to say thanks again to Tom for helping with us tonight, and to Kathy Misko for letting us visit her home. home and sharing her passion with us. And I would like to say that all the beekeepers I've talked to make this into a real obsession or passion. And before we go, I'd like to also thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to Show Me Ag. We hope you'll tune in next time for another look at a topic touching rural Missouri. For everyone here at KMOS and myself, good night. We're also very interested in what you have to say. So if you have any feedback you'd like to share with us, email us at showmeag@kmos.org, or you can find us on Facebook.